we've got a fantastic panel with us here today. First, we have Christopher Finalyson, returns to his career in law now, but we all probably know him a little better as former Attorney General and Minister of Treaty of Waitangi Negotiations. We have Parekawhia McLean, Chair for Whakakitenga, or Waikato, CEO of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and somebody who, in a variety of roles you'll see in the biography in your book, has been an active participant and leader within Crown-Māori relations in different capacities for many years. We also have Jason Mika. Jason is an Associate Professor of Māori Business here at Te Waikato Management School and really a leading thinker on the intersection between Te Māori and the commercial and business world, and a leader in the research space for that as well. So very much looking forward to this question. I'll ask each of you to make some opening comments, 3 to 5 minutes, otherwise that cough, that conspicuous cough will be your warning, and then we'll open up to questions, please, from the floor and on Slido, and let's get into it. So I might ask for you, on here I'll come down. Christopher, please, you're up there, just here. It's fine.
Raurangatira mā tēnei taku mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, e ngā mate, haere atu rā. And as I acknowledge you, intellectual and civic leaders, what I've said also is I acknowledge those who have passed, and I particularly want to mention 2 of my former colleagues, Chester Borrows, whom we buried yesterday, with the love, the aroha of Ngāti Ruanui and Ngā Ruahine, and also one of my predecessors as Attorney General, Paul East, who died after a very long and courageous struggle with Parkinson's, and I know Jim Bolger's here and he'd want me to say that as well. Can I also acknowledge Tainui, the great iwi, not only of Waikato, as some people think, but also all the way through to Tāmaki, and of course one of the kings used to have his summer palace on the grounds of what is now the Auckland War Memorial Museum. And there are some interesting discussions that will go on about boundaries as between Ngāti Whātua and Waikato Tainui, and I very much look forward to observing those, having been the minister dealing with them for many years. Can I tell you a story? A couple of weeks ago, the wife of the United States ambassador here asked me a question. She said, you know this stuff about co-governance, are you talking about treaty-based partnerships? And I said, well, yes, I am. And she said, I'll send you some material. And she sent me some stuff about an area of 1.3 million acres in southern Utah called the Bears Ears Monument. And it was set aside by President Obama. The great toxic narcissist of Mar-a-Lago reduced it to about 5 acres, and then President Biden extended it back out to 1.3 million acres, and it is co-managed by the United States Bureau of Land Management and 5 First Nations groups, including the Navajo and the Pueblo. And it's one of a number of examples in the United States of treaty-based co-management. And that's what we're talking about, or I'm talking about, and I worked with Stephen Joyce and others on when I was in government from 2008 to 2017. Now that he's passed away, I can probably blame Michael Cullen for introducing the term co-governance, which has developed a life of its own, because some people are conflating co-governance and co-government, but that's not what it's about. It was about treaty-based co-management of natural resources, normally reached, but not always, through treaty settlements. And the first one I had to deal with was over the Great Waikato River after I became the minister, and I worked with Te Arawa and Tūwharetoa and Ngāti Maniapoto to bring the Waipa into that arrangement, and that has been very successful, and I acknowledge the late John Luxton, who worked with Tuku Morgan on that as co-chairs. And there have been other examples that I introduced when I was Minister for Treaty of Waitangi negotiations. So that's the genesis of treaty-based co-management. Expunge co-governance from your lexicon because it's confusing and mischievous. Talk about treaty-based co-management of natural resources, and there you have something which I believe is extremely positive and good for the country. And there's nothing new under the sun. So I'll leave it there. I'm tempted to say if you want further material on the background, you should, this sounds awfully arrogant, but I'll say it anyway, go to my book. And the other thing you may do if you can't be bothered helping me with royalties is go to the Listener of a couple of weeks ago where there is an article by me on that. Now there's going to be debate about Article 3 and co-governance. Maybe we could explore some of those issues a little later on.
Kia ora, Christopher, thank you. Parekawhia.
Tēnā tātou katoa, e aku nui, e aku rahi, huri no te whare, tēnei te mihi atu. Ko Waiahau, ko Pirongia te maunga, ko Waipā te awa, ko Waikato tainui te iwi, ko Ngāti Maniapoto hoki, ko Parekawhia, e mihi ana ki a tātou katoa. And look, I just had to bring Christopher's book along, given we were talking about this very important kaupapa. But really it is an honour to be here alongside both Christopher and Jason today. This is a kaupapa that is dear to my heart, Crown-Māori relations. And like Christopher, I'm going to share with you a personal story. I've also brought along notes because my day role is as a CEO of a Crown entity, and given the events of the week, I need to be very careful about what I say, given the media here and others as well. So, look, it is a privilege. I've had the privilege of almost 12 years being in a leadership role with Waikato Tainui, and so I'm going to share some of the insights and experiences that I've had. Before I talk about the co-governance, co-management arrangements, however, from the Waikato River settlement, it is really important first to acknowledge that 28 years ago, in 1995, through the leadership of the late Māori Queen, Te Ariki Nui, Dame Te Atairangi Kāhu, and we have in the presence the Prime Minister at that time, Tā Sir Jim Bolger here, who signed our Raupatu land settlement. I was in the States at that time, but my parents were present at Tūranga Waiwai Marae. And if you imagine in those days, we didn't have the opportunity, the ability to text, to Instagram or to Facebook or TikTok real-time action. Instead, my mother wrote a beautiful letter describing in detail that day, and described what really resonated with me was the reason why her and Dad supported the mahi at that time of the late Sir Robert Mahuta and the settlement. And that was despite her cousin, the very ferocious and formidable Eva Rickard, and her whānau protesting outside Tūranga Waiwai that day. And what she said in her letter to me was that she wanted me and my siblings and their mokopuna to come to really have the opportunity to determine for ourselves our future. And so she was very much about supporting and building the prosperity of our iwi. I have that letter still, and whenever I read it, I'm very emotional about it. I was emotional at the time because I wasn't back here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm emotional about it now because both my parents have now passed on. And it is one of the reasons, I guess, one of the drivers for me personally as to why I involve myself in the day-to-day lives and the leadership of our iwi. There are two other points that I wanted to make about that particular settlement, the Raupatu settlement. The first is around the statement that, or our narrative from Waikato Tainui, I rero whenua atu, me hoki whenua mai. as land was taken at that time, so it should be returned. The other point within the preamble of that act and that settlement refers to this being a process of healing and the new age of cooperation between the Crown, the Kingitanga and Waikato. And that's a nice segue into our second historical settlement, and that of the Waikato River claim. And Christopher is correct when he draws on and the references of co-management within our settlement. However, from an iwi perspective, from a Waikato perspective, what is also important are some of the kupu and the references to te mana o te awa, the prestige of the river. The river is a tupuna. We consider her to be our ancestor. Te mana whakahaere, which is referencing the authority, not just Waikato, but the other river iwi have in terms of the management and access to the river and her resources. And the final point is really te ture whaimana, which is a reference to the vision and strategy of our settlement, which is all about restoring and protecting the health and well-being of the Waikato River for future generations. And that is something that is an interest to many others, not just to the iwi. So when I was appointed the CEO of Waikato Tainui in 2010, one of my accountabilities was to work with a diverse group of organisations, central government, local authorities, many other stakeholder and interest groups, to how do we give effect to that vision and strategy. And it's embodied very much in the Waikato River Authority that Christopher has mentioned, which was co-chaired at the time by the Honourable John Luxton and Tuku Morgan, my fellow tribal leader. Recently, I read a News Hub Seats at the Table series around co-governance, and they described the arrangement with the Waikato River Authority as shockingly tame. No assets have been stolen, there's no powers have been grabbed. It's a bunch of people sitting around a board table doing board stuff, making decisions and sharing the accountability for financing and outcomes. Probably the distinguishing feature, however, is that they're doing it on a consensus basis. So they keep talking it through until they reach a consensus. I think I'm going to leave it there. I will make some other comments throughout this discussion. I do want to share another story, though. When I had a meeting with a CEO who will remain anonymous, who seriously thought that co-management meant having a cup of tea with me every 6 months. He got the message very quickly because we never ever had a cup of tea again. Instead, that was replaced with a decision-making committee with equal numbers of councillors representing our communities, central government officials, and of course Waikato River iwi leaders. So from a Waikato Tainui perspective, the relationships that we've forged over time will continue to endure, and the benefits gained from this arrangement are for current and future generations to enjoy. I want to leave this with a comment from my fellow tribal leader, Tuku Morgan, and I'm going to be much more diplomatic. He's much more harder hitting and straight to the point. But he also says, what is good for Waikato is good for the region and great for our nation. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Parekawhia. Thank you. Jason.
Kia ora tātou. Tūtahi ka mea tia hau ki tō tātou kaihana i runga rawa. Nānei timata, nānei tango nā mea katoa nō reira whakakororia ki tōna tapu i nā wā katoa. Tuarua ka mea ki te kingi tūhei tia. Nānei whakamarumaru i tātou i tēnei wā. No Waikato Tainui te whenua, nō reira ka nui te mihi ki a kōtaura. Ka nui te mihi ki a tātou, te hui nei, kia ora tātou. Kia ora ki nā mānai kōrero kai runga i te pai, tēnei ata, tēnei kōrero, kia Christopher, kia Parekawhia, ki taku pāhi anō hoki ko koe tērā Matt, ka nui te mihi kia koe. Kia ora everyone. It's just an honour and a privilege for me to be on this panel. I feel pretty happy to be here in the company of greatness. I think we've got a former minister here who's had a lot to do with my iwi, Tūhoi, who settled with the Crown on their treaty settlements some years ago. And also Parekawhia. When I was a policy analyst in Te Puni Kōkiri in the 1990s, Parekawhia was at the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and we used to look up to Parekawhia. And I used to take advice from Parekawhia when I was writing our cabinet papers and whatnot. So I had a lot of fun in those days. But my kaupapa now is really all about supporting Indigenous economic development and entrepreneurship. So the kōrero around co-governance and this forum, this auspicious occasion, is really how can we foster and grow Māori economic development, Māori enterprise development, through whatever it is we are talking about today. And so on the kaupapa of co-governance, I guess I've got 5 points to make in my 2 minutes probably now. The first one is that when we're thinking about co-governance and co-management and co-anything, we have a model to follow, and it's Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the Treaty of Waitangi. And so if we're unsure about what co-governance actually looks like, read the Treaty of Waitangi. Just read the document. Read what our tipuna, our ancestors, our Pākehā and the Māori ancestors wrote there and why they wrote it and what it means for us today. And it's about partnership. It's about working together. It's about including each other's views, each other's knowledges, each other's aspirations, and what is best for our nation, for our country. And inside that treaty, there's a kaupapa called Tino Rangatiratanga. Now, next door to Tino Rangatiratanga is called Mana Motu Hake. Now, Mana Motu Hake is all about tribal autonomy. It's about the tribe deciding what is best for its people and their whenua, their lands, their waters. Not just for themselves, but for all of us. All of us. And our iwi, Tūhoi, its kaupapa is Mana Motu Hake. Nothing else. Ko te Mana Motu Hake. Why is that important? Because unless we decide what's important and what is best, then someone else will decide for us. So co-governance starts with acknowledging Mana Motu Hake, Tino Rangatiratanga, the treaty partner, coming together to offer the best, not just for Māori, but for all of us. Koena te kaupapa tuatahi. So the other thing that I wanted to say is examples. Where does this happen? And I was going to talk about Tūhoi, but Christopher reminded me that Tūhoi, Tūhoi governance is actually, it's not co-governance, it's Tūhoi governance over Te Urawera. So we can park that one. What I wanted to talk about is 2 examples. One is called a group that you may not have heard of. It's called Te Rangi Tūkupu. Now, Te Rangi Tūkupu was set up by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Māori who have an interest in trade around the time that New Zealand hosted APEC 2021. It was a partnership body, co-governance organisation. Although Jane Kelsey counselled me and she said, don't call it co-governance, it's a structure of partnership, Jason. Okay, kia ora Jane, thank you. And I was also counselled by Peter Tipene. Anyone know Peter Tipene? Very formidable man. And Jane and Peter and Moana and others who are involved in that group, and also Te Taumata, very clearly said that koena te tikana, it's treaty partnership. We have our contribution to make, and the government has its contribution to make to achieve best outcomes from APEC 2021. And if you want to look at what co-governance looks like, read the principles of that agreement. They took 6 months to negotiate, so a lot of tough conversations, you can imagine, with Peter Tipene, is going to hold the line. So that's an example for us to look at as to co-governance and how it influences policy. The other one that, again, we may not have heard of, but some of you may be participating in it, either you know or you don't know, but it is our churches. You take any church in this country and you look at the structure, the way in which they operate. And they have, they have their Māori synod, they have their Pākehā synod, they've got Fijian, Tongan synod, whether it's the Methodists, the Catholics, Anglicans, Presbyterians, they all acknowledge Te Tiriti o Waitangi. They acknowledge Mātauranga Māori. They acknowledge Māori and their ways of being as part of the church structure, the way that they make decisions, set policy, provide for their churches, look after assets together. May not always be harmonious, but they have an example for us to look at. And then the other thing that I just wanted to say briefly, if I may, is that mana motuhake, tino rangatiratanga, tribal autonomy, and these sorts of things, it's evidence-based. It works. It's not just evidence in Aotearoa. You go to Harvard, they've been studying this for 30 years. Self-determination for tribal peoples results in the best possible outcomes. Better than any government department could produce, better than any other private corporation. So it works. So when you hand and you acknowledge tino rangatiratanga, self-determination of tribal peoples, best possible economic outcomes result. So in short, basically, if we want economic development among tribal people, among Māori, whether that's entrepreneurs or businesses, what we need to be talking about is how do we give effect to mana motuhake? How do we grab it and support it and enable it? Because the best possible outcomes result from it, and we get a treaty partner who is geared up and ready to do business and to make the best possible decisions for our people. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Jason.
Kia ora, Jason. Fantastic openings, all three, so thank you. All right, I'm going to dive into, there are a lot of questions that have come through here from the audience, and we'll give an opportunity directly as well. I'm going to start on co-governance. I won't stay only on co-governance. This is a broader discussion. But Christopher, your article in The Listener recently, I can wholeheartedly recommend that to the group here. You talked about co-management, and I think you've just told us to expunge the governance term from this, and you've applied it very clearly there to co-management of resources. We have examples, the Waikato River and so on. Can you explain to us how that might work, or whether it should work in your view, across areas that are not natural resource based? Because I think in the last 6 to 12 months, some of the reasons that co-governance has become a flashpoint in discussions have been about understandings or misunderstandings around application through broader areas of policy.
Sure. Well, in my experience, let me take you to my time as Minister for Arts and Culture, because I was dealing with a number of bodies. For example, what was once known as the Historic Places Trust, it's now Heritage New Zealand, and also the Arts Council. And there were, within the structure of those organisations, there were particular Māori bodies. So, for example, for years, we've had the Māori Heritage Council as part of what is now Heritage New Zealand. And with the Arts Council, since Doug Graham's reforms in the early 1990s, when Creative New Zealand was born, we've had Te Whakakitenga. So these sorts of bodies are not unknown. Whether or not they are co-governance, I don't think they are, but there are specific bodies within organisations. What you are asking is the extent to which this principle that I outlined in relation to natural resources should also be applied in other areas of government administration, and that's where there is a debate, and it will come as no surprise to you. I incline to the views of Mr. Luxon, who said that co-governance as a means by which service can be provided in all instances may not be the right approach, that what we need to do is focus heavily on ensuring that there are top quality services which are available for everyone. But that's the area of contemporary debate, and we're in an election season where presumably some of those themes will emerge. I think the real problem in all this has come from and I don't think there's some kind of Jesuitical plan out there, but I think an inability to articulate what co-governance means beyond what I've been talking about and into the more Article 3 issues.
Thank you. I might go to you, Parekawhia, and very genuinely, feel free to pass on questions. I'm conscious of your mandate as a leader within the public sector as well. So, building on what Christopher's just said, can you talk to us, what's your take on the applications of co-management, co-governance, the incorporation of Te Māori and the Crown into delivery of other services? We've obviously, you look at education, kura kaupapa, very long-term model, health is a big topic now. How do you see that working, and how do you believe that should work?
Yeah, look, that's a really important question, and I'll tell you what is not co-governance. Maybe if I start there, and I'll use the hauora reforms as an example. The Māori Health Authority, Te Ako Whaiora, is not, I believe, a representation of co-governance. And why I say that, if I look at the Waikato River Authority, where you have equal membership of Crown appointees, and River iwi appointees, as well as, and there's a mix on the Crown side, you've got local government leaders and so on. The Māori Health Authority, Te Ako Whaiora, they're appointed by ministers under the Paiora Act. They are a statutory entity. Similarly is Te Whatuora. So I think it's really important to make that really clear, that because that keeps coming up, I think, in that public debate. What is co-governance from a social policy perspective? So certainly in my view anyway, the Māori Health Authority is not a co-governance arrangement. The question, however, is how do you improve, or how do you address, what is the mechanism to address health inequities for a significant population, our Māori communities and Pacific peoples? You look at the evidence, you look at it, the epidemiological evidence, and it's been like this for a number of generations. That is a response, that is one response that has come out of the Paiora legislation, but it's not the only response. If I think about the response to COVID, the real change happened on the ground in terms of vaccination with the many providers, including hauora Māori providers, Pacific providers, our PHOs, mainstream providers, were joined up together and responded. Really, I believe, in some cases, they didn't need to be told by Wellington. In fact, that's the thing. You don't need to be given a mandate from Wellington to know what you need to do in the case of COVID. People got out there and did what they had to do, pulled together to respond. So that's my opening comment there around co-governance and arrangements like that.
Thank you.
In terms of social policy.
I'm going to go into a question here that's come through, and it's one that if you stray on your radio dial when you're driving into the world of talkback radio, this is the one where you'll get people really diving in and so on. So, but I'm really interested in your views as thought leaders in this space. Are there circumstances where people who are Māori should have different decision-making rights based on ancestry when it comes to provision of public services? What's your take on that, Chris?
Do you want to have a crack at it?
Jason, you go first.
Well, if you're thinking about, when organisations, institutions want to incorporate Te Tiriti o Waitangi in what they do, whether that's a university or a health ministry or a business, a large firm that deals with and works with Māori. A lot of organisations now are sort of saying, well, how do we incorporate Te Tiriti o Waitangi into our organisation and what it is we do so we get better outcomes for people, whether that's health or education or anything else. The problem you strike in that situation is, who is the treaty partner? And how do we recognise them? Who do we talk to? Who is the treaty partner? For instance, If an organisation like a university, I won't pick on this one because I work for this one now, I pick on one I used to work for. Now, if a university says we want to be tiriti-led, we want to incorporate te tiriti o Waitangi in everything we do, that's wonderful. Who is the treaty partner? You've got a vice-chancellor, you've got a council, they have all the mana. And the managers have all the mana, the resources, the delegation. And so when you want to incorporate te tiriti o Waitangi in any organisation, who do we talk to? Do you talk to your Māori staff? Do you talk to mana whenua on whose whenua these organisations, these businesses are based? Do you talk to an advisory group set up alongside a council and ask them, are you the treaty partner? Should I be talking to you? So when we talk about, well, who is the treaty partner? Yes, whakapapa does matter. Because whakapapa, what that says is who you are, where you come from. Where are your people buried? Where were you brought up? Who do you whakapapa to? So yes, ancestry is really important when it comes to my right to speak, my right to stand, my right to express my view on what is best for our people. And not just for Māori, again, for all of us. So that's all I have to say on that. Kia ora.
Thank you, Jason. Parekawhia.
Yep, I'm going to respond to this. I acknowledge the comments that if you are listening to radio all the time, I don't buy into that argument about it's based on ancestry at all. I think policy intervention must be led by evidence, and there's very clear evidence around inequity in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the impact that has had, particularly on our Māori population and Pacifica people, and our younger generation too. So purely from a policy perspective and intervening on improving outcomes for whānau, for households, for businesses, then it has to be evidence-led.
Thank you. Christopher?
Well, I mentioned Te Whakatoi because if Circa Theatre or Fortune Theatre can't apply for funding to Te Whakatoi, it's Māori for Māori. And so we've had these sorts of bodies before. The issue for debate is the extent to which those sorts of principles should apply to other areas of government administration, and that's where the debate is at the moment. But do not believe that these things have never happened before, because they have.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on a point you raised in your response there, Jason, and take it in a different direction about who is the treaty partner. In this discussion, the title is Crown-Māori Relations. Just looking to the Crown side, how do we reconcile the bicultural system that's inherent in that name and some of these discussions with a society that's visibly and obviously multicultural, where people have come from many different corners over many different times and may feel an affiliation with the Crown or may not for other reasons? Do you want to unpack a little bit how we might reconcile those two?
Yes, I guess the question of are we a bicultural nation or a multicultural nation does come up. My view on that is that we're both. We're a bicultural nation in terms of how we were founded. It wasn't France who we were, our ancestors were doing a deal with. It was England and Queen Victoria and so forth. And what we have from that occasion, from Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is a coming together of two cultures, of two peoples, of two sovereign nations who wanted to engage in what the future of Aotearoa would look like. So in that sense, we're a bicultural nation, but we're also multicultural. Demographics tells you that. I've got Tongan and Māori kids, so there's a lot of our whānau out here that sort of tell us that, look, we're from all over the world, and we need to acknowledge that. And under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, there's a place for everyone. When you think about the purpose of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, it was a way to welcome everyone to Aotearoa and to look after them. Now, Māori had a big sense of responsibility. Whenever someone comes to a Māori home, you manaaki that person, that visitor. So when people are coming to Aotearoa, you manaaki them. You have a responsibility for their well-being. And you do it to the very best of your ability. Not minimal. You don't give them a ginger nut cookie. You put the pot on. And you make sure they're well fed and they're so full, they don't want to leave. But, you just got to say, kindly, please, I've got to get back to my job. So, look, we're both. And I'm, so pleased to say that we are both. Have we got some things to work out? Yeah, we've got a few things to work out with one another as to tiriti, tangata tiriti, tangata whenua, and how we work together, which is the kōrero for our day today.
Anybody else like to comment on that?
No, e tautoko ana, te kōrero nei.
Oh, kia ora.
Oh, here we go. I'm going to look out. Are there any questions from... Yes, can we get a microphone to Josie?
Kia ora, thank you for such a stimulating conversation. So I wondered, you mentioned about Te Whatuora and the Māori Health Authority. It seems to me like that's a real centralised model. It's another kind of big centralised model, just changing, giving it a Māori name. And then I look at the kura model and I think, well, kura kaupapa is devolution. So I wonder if our whole debate around co-governance is kind of moved us away from a debate around devolution, which feels far more substantive and radical to me in terms of devolution of resources and decision-making. So which is it? Which one should we be going for?
I think if you ask this question and put this partai to the late Sir Robert Mahuta, in fact he said it, he was an advocate for devolving resources decision-making fully to the treaty partner, to iwi. Clearly that's not where we're at. We're in an environment and a time, as we should be, and picking up on the comment that Jason made, that we're a nation that allows for all to be able to express their mana motuhake. And so we have a variety of institutions that provide for that.
I think that's an excellent question, and one of the great debates that we're going to have this year is whether the centripetal tendency of this government is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm a centrifugalist. I'm a great believer in devolution, because having been a minister for 9 years, I believe the institutional state simply cannot do what is necessary, and as a matter of principle, you devolve so much as is possible to local communities because you will achieve better outcomes. Some people would say that's Reaganism. I would say it's good, solid common sense. The central government, there is a belief in Wellington, and it's a genuine belief, and I'm sure it's a noble belief, but it's a crazy belief that the state can, through Wellington, can solve problems. It can't. And I know that when Poto Williams recently said that Kelvin had said to her that good luck, sister, everyone hates Doc. And that you apply that across the board because the institutional state doesn't understand iwi.
I'm going to stay with you for a moment, Christopher. There's a question come through specifically to you. In your time as Minister, more than 50 treaty settlements. Where to next for the treaty settlement process? And then if interested in other views.
Well, thank you for asking that question, whoever it was. It wasn't 50, it was 60. And I was recently at something where someone said, oh, well, we're on to the difficult settlements now, as if Tūhoi was a sort of a jog in the park. So I think that's a way of rationalising the cetacean pace that we've had in the last little period. So I think that there will be a period where full and hopefully final settlements will be achieved. I make no apologies for the fact that I was very keen to see treaty settlements. If you want a good read the Taylor, Diagnan, Barry report on iwi achievement. obviously Waikato Tainui is an outstanding success, but one that I need to mention to you is Ngāti Toa, with whom Stephen and I settled in the early 2010s, and we settled for about $90 million, and the TDP report says they're worth about 800 million now, a bit of gearing because of all that wonderful housing development around Kenaparu, but they've got on with it, and I want other iwi to enjoy that. But then you ask the next question, where to from there? I am adamant that if the institutional state doesn't honour the commitments that were made by the political state, then we'll be back to the drawing boards again, because we say that they're full and final, and yet there are many undertakings that have not been honoured by the Crown. So it's the state has to get its act in order, recognise that these are not commercial deals which are done and dusted and you can move on to something else. I believe they're constitutional agreements, and that there is a real obligation on the part of the state to ensure that these are honoured, and more than that, if I can use Pentecost Sunday, we've got to breathe the Spirit into these agreements on a regular basis, because they are not dry commercial agreements. And if they're treated like that, then folks, they're going to fail, and the next generation will be back to the drawing board.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on that?
I mean, Christopher's made some very powerful statements, and I certainly support them as an iwi leader. I'm often asked and invited to meet with iwi who've just settled. And a couple of things that I say to them, first of all, to get yourself through negotiating a claim requires quite a different set of skills and expertise for actually driving through an agenda of building the prosperity of an iwi. They're very different set of skill sets. And so I say to iwi that have just settled, really invest in your strategic plan going forward, but also identify the key capability skill sets that you require to drive the future forward for your people. And thirdly, there's no such thing as over-communication. You've got to get out there and talk it to your people, but also to the wider public about what you are doing. Ngāti Toa is an excellent example that is operating under the radar, and in a very short space of time, you know, they're almost $1 billion entity. Waikato, Ngaitahu, we were the first ones off the rank, but there were a number of others coming as well. Ngāpuhi, I'm going to acknowledge Ngāpuhi because that is the claim that still has to be resolved, and I'm having got Ngāpuhi whānau and friends, I hope that that can be achieved certainly in my lifetime.
Kia ora. We are close to time, but I might ask one question. Jim?
Father.
Can I question?
It's an informal family.
Fascinating discussion. But my question cuts to the chase, I think. Having been involved with treaty settlements from the beginning, and thank you, Tainui, I've said it many, many times, having the courage to go first. Somebody had to break the mould. And it's certainly not our friends Ngāpuhi up the north. They were a bit more difficult. I'll just make that observation in passing. And of course, I worked with Chris on Tūhoi, and that was remarkable when we reached a decision, and I was in the office with Chris Finalyson and his team, that rather than dividing ourselves forever on who owned the land, we declared the land owned itself. And that is a dramatic shift in the normal approach to everything. There's an owner. Somebody has to be the owner. And this, we turned around and said, no, the land owns itself. We are just there to look after it, to manage it. And when you think about that, that of course fits entirely into the whole environmental and conservation debate and whatever we're doing, and fits in very well, and it's good. But that wasn't my question. I got distracted by myself. My question is much more...
I'll bring out the cough soon.
That's right. My question is a much more serious one. Most New Zealanders see co-governance as giving preference to one part of New Zealand over another. I'm sorry, half of them seem to approach me because somehow or other I'm responsible for it, I have no idea why, and ask me what we're going to do about it. And I'd like the panel to, how do we move people? I totally accept what Chris and Parekawhia have been saying in terms of what we should be talking about, but we're not. As a society, as a community, we're not. How do we move the community to that space so they have that, what I describe as a broader understanding of what we're talking about, one based on the treaty? Because I'm somewhat fearful if we don't. We have one political party who looks like they're going to be influential, who wants to have a referendum on what the treaty means. Could you think of anything more divisive in New Zealand than that? But that's a serious proposition. And it's been said it will be part of the requirement to go into a coalition to possibly form the next government. So we have some big issues, and I'd just be keen to get the view of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason, I might start at your end, and then we won't go too long on this because I'm conscious we, as you said with Te Wera and the Tūhoi, I think that discussion does lead directly into our next panel around taking care of the environment. But Jason, your take, and we'll go quickly through.
Kia ora mo te pātai. Thank you for the question. I guess the future, just briefly, I think what we could do is to model the process of having a debate on what Te Tiriti o Waitangi and partnership under Te Tiriti o Waitangi looks like, on what we hope it to be or what we want it to be. So that everyone sort of has a feel like they can be part of the conversation, part of the debate, and share their views, but model it on what what the treaty sort of says around partnership. So basically a partnership-based approach. It's not one side saying, well, we're going to define it. It's not the other saying, well, we're already there. It's actually how do we bring both parties together and have a meaningful discussion about the future. And just lastly, Te Tiriti o Waitangi settlements, treaty settlements, is not the end, it's just the beginning.
Correct.
It's the beginning of our relationship together, and it sets out some rules, some values, and some things that we've got to do towards one another, and if we follow them, we'll be okay.
Thank you, Jason.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koe te rangatira mō tō pātai. This is probably a session on its own, to be honest, Matt. But from my perspective, it is doing what Jason has recommended, and also, we've got to get more of the communications and have more conversations like this. But I also wonder too whether we need to engage more proactively with the next generation, because they are, and I think of my children and my mokopuna, they have quite a different take on us as a nation, and they're more exposed to te ao Māori, te ao Pacifica, to other cultures, and I think that's where the effort and energy has to be put, to be honest. I think we have to accept there will always be a part of our population that will never, and are not interested in engaging on matters to do with the tiriti. But I don't believe, and this is me being the optimistic person that I am, that is the same with our younger generation, where we've got this introduced into the curricula now. So, koinei, taku whakaaro.
Very quickly, I think there are two limbs to it. It's first, know what you're talking about, and that's a responsibility of the political class to have clarity about what they're talking about. And the reason why we have some unfortunate outbursts about co-governance is because the concept is muddled and it's upsetting otherwise good people. I agree with Parekawhia. You're always going to have Douglas Hurd called them the sour right. They hate homosexuals, hate Jews, the wogs were going to kara. You're always going to have those people. But the vast majority of people have good intentions and are well-spirited, but they need to know what you're talking about, and it's muddled at the moment. So I can understand why there's some fear. And so clarity about, are we moving beyond what I negotiated in my 9 years into new territory of co-governance? If we are, why are we doing it? and what do we mean by it? And the second thing is, once you have clarity, explain and explain and explain. John Key took me to one side during the foreshore and seabed debate and said, get out there and explain what you're doing in words of one syllable and stop talking like a lawyer. It was sound advice, just constant repetition. And he used to say to us, didn't he, Stephen, you may get bored yourself. I don't care if you get bored. Your job is to communicate the message. So having a message that's not muddled and communicating it repetitively and carefully does matter.
Can I just say, and also read Mr. Finlay's book. Okay. I direct you to chapter 8.
All right. Look, a fantastic discussion and also an important discussion. I want to acknowledge all three of you for your contributions today, but also your contributions to this outside of this room. Very much appreciated. And let's put our hands together and then move on to the next.